Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is African American youth, some of the problems and some of the challenges faced by African American youth. And we're fortunate to have with us this morning to talk about some of the challenges facing African American youth today, Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University. Dr. Sanford, let me welcome you to the show and to tell you how delighted we are to have you here. And I'm almost sure that some of my viewers can recall having seen you on this particular show on a number of occasions since over the last few years.
Yeah,
and so, again, we're simply delighted to have you back with us and to deal with the topic that we want to deal with this morning, some of the challenges faced by African American youth. You've talked about African American youth in terms of institutional racism. You've given us a lot of information about the health and well-being of African American youth. And so we thought that it might be appropriate now to call you back and to have you to deal with that kind of information for our audience this morning. But before we get into that, Dr. Sanford, let's have you to give us some information about EKSanford, your background and some of the information, and then we'll get into the topic for the morning.
Absolutely, and thank you again for having me on. I am Dr. EKSanford. I'm a professor of sociology at Tennessee State University. I did my postdoc degree at Penn State University in State College, Pennsylvania. Did my PhD at Howard University in Washington, D.C. My undergraduate at UNC and North Carolina Central University in Durham and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm originally from Oxford, North Carolina. All my degrees were in the social science, sociology area. Had an opportunity to do a small time at the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. And I was very proud of that as an opportunity as well, looking at social problems and issues that impacted urban and rural areas throughout the United States and abroad.
You know, and of course, one of the challenges, and I think since you mentioned the urban area and et cetera, I think one of the challenges that youth face today has to deal with the urban area in a real sense. And as a matter of fact, it sort of recalls some of the things that both of us are familiar with during the 1960s and et cetera, et cetera. But let's look at some of the challenges. I think we've got about 2 minutes before this first segment ends for the day. Let's look at some of the challenges, Dr. Sanford, in terms of the African American youth today, which is to say that we understand that this is not the only group that we're concerned with, but this is a major problem in American society today. So what are some of the challenges that you see in reference to this group today?
Absolutely, it's a great challenge. As a matter of fact, here we are in 2014 on the brink of celebrating President Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty. So that challenge was there during that time. And as you just mentioned, it was really for the majority group. He himself, as president, grew up in a very poor, restricted, and depressed area. So he had a conscience and a concern about that. As we fast forward 50 years later, we still have those same challenges with poverty, distressed areas, particularly now in urban areas and in rural areas throughout the United States. It disproportionately has affected African Americans and other minority youth. And I think it's a very important topic to talk about, because when you place it into the historical context of it, some of the same issues that was related 50 years ago are still very present today. And I'm hoping as we go through this morning that we'd have an opportunity to talk about some of those characteristics that are very much related to the disproportionate amount of problems that still exist within the African American community, particularly African American youth.
And especially African American youth that are growing up. You see, as a matter of fact, some of the problems in terms of maturity and coming of age and et cetera, some of these young people are having some real problems in terms of doing that. And I think that the information that you can give us this morning will at least lay a foundation for some of the things that ought to be done. I think that, as you've indicated, back in the 1960s, we were both familiar with the war on poverty, as it was called. But now I think that it's time to go into another war on poverty. And I don't think that that's saying that after all of these years that the war on poverty has been a failure. And I know it has not been a failure from my own personal point of view, because I was also a part of those who were assisted during the so-called war on poverty. when they started the Job Corps program. And that was the program that in a real sense lifted me up
Yes.
and carried me far away. And so those individuals who might argue today that the war on poverty was a failure, the only thing I can say is to look at Dr. Sanford
That's right.
and look at Dr. James Haney
You're right.
and some of the others who were assisted in a real sense dealing with the war on poverty. And so that's
Absolutely.
why we wanted to, in a real sense, to demonstrate the importance of that earlier war on poverty and what we need to do now. And we're going to pick up at that point following this very, very short commercial break. And we'll be back with our audience following this short commercial break.